Once upon a time, in a quiet village surrounded by dense forests and whispering streams, there lived a poor miller and his only daughter. The miller was a proud man, but his pride often led him into trouble. One day, in a bold and careless moment, he boasted to the king himself, "My daughter can spin straw into gold." The king's eyes glittered with greed. "Straw into gold," he repeated, his voice sharp like a cold winter wind. "Bring her to my castle tonight. If she truly can, I will reward her richly. If not, well, we shall see." The miller's daughter, a gentle and kind girl, had never spun even a single thread in her life. Her heart sank at her father's words, and a chill ran down her spine. "What have you done, father?" she whispered, tears filling her eyes. But the miller, realizing too late the trouble he had caused, could only shrug helplessly. That very night, she was taken to the king's castle. The halls were enormous, echoing every step she took, and the cold stone walls seemed to whisper warnings in the darkness. She was led into a massive room, far larger than any she had ever seen, filled with tall piles of dry straw that reached almost to the ceiling. The moonlight from the tiny windows barely lit the room. The girl's hands trembled as she looked around. How can I spin straw into gold?" she whispered, her voice quivering with fear. She sank to the floor, clutching her skirts, wishing she were anywhere else in the world. The room was silent, save for the faint rustle of straw, which sounded almost like whispering voices in the dark. Suddenly, from the shadows, a tiny figure appeared. He was no taller than her knee, with a hunched back, long fingers, and eyes that sparkled strangely in the dim light. "So, you are the girl who must spin straw into gold," he said, his voice soft yet strange, carrying a hint of mischief and mystery. The girl gasped. Who are you?" she stammered. Her heart pounded in her chest. "I am someone who can help you," the little man replied, stepping closer. "But everything has a price." "Everything." His eyes gleamed like tiny stars in the dark. Tears ran down the girl's cheeks. She felt trapped, alone, and terrified. "Please. I don't know how. I can't do it on my own. I need your help," she whispered, her voice breaking. The tiny man smiled, a cunning, almost frightening smile that made her shiver. "Very well," he said. "I will help you. But remember, one day, you must give me something in return. Something I will ask for, not now, but later." Desperation clouded her fear. She nodded quickly. Anything you want, just help me now." With a snap of his long, slender fingers, the straw began to twist and turn, glowing faintly at first, then shining brighter and brighter. By morning, the entire room sparkled with gold. The piles of straw had disappeared, replaced with golden treasures that shone in the pale light of dawn. The girl's eyes widened in awe and fear. She could hardly believe what she had seen. When the king returned, his eyes grew wide, and a greedy smile spread across his face. "This is more than I ever imagined," he exclaimed. "Tomorrow, I want even more gold. If you succeed, your rewards will be great. Fail, and, well, you must succeed." The girl shivered. She had no idea what to do next. And in the corner of the room, the tiny man watched silently, his eyes glinting, as if he knew secrets no one else could guess. He vanished into the shadows as mysteriously as he had appeared, leaving a faint whisper in the air. "Remember, every gift comes at a price." The night stretched long and cold. The girl lay awake on the hard stone floor, staring at the golden treasures around her. Her heart beat fast, filled with fear and wonder. Who was that strange little man? What did he want from her? And could she survive the king's greed and the price of magic? No one could tell. Only the shadows and the golden straw seemed to know the answers, whispering secrets that would only be revealed in time. The night after the girl's first golden miracle, the king's greed only grew. He did not wait for morning to bask in the glittering treasure. "You have done well," he said, pacing before her. "But tomorrow, you will spin an even bigger room full of straw into gold. If you succeed, riches will flow endlessly. If not," he paused, letting the threat hang like a dark cloud. The girl's heart raced. How could she spin more straw into gold? She had no idea. Desperation pressed against her chest like a heavy stone. She wanted to run, to hide, but the massive castle walls and the king's strict guards left her no escape. As the sun sank and shadows stretched across the straw-filled room, she sank to the floor, her face buried in her hands. She felt hopeless. I can't do this. I'll fail, and he will be angry, she whispered to herself. Then, a tiny tapping echoed in the corner of the room. A shadow moved, and the strange little man appeared again. His small figure seemed almost larger in the dim light, as though his presence carried magic itself.
Ah,
he said, his voice soft but sly. You seem troubled, little one. I don't know how I will spin all this straw into gold. I can't do it, she cried, looking up at him with tearful eyes. The little man smiled, showing a row of sharp, tiny teeth. I can help you, he said, but everything comes at a price. Nothing is free in this world of magic. The girl hesitated. Price, she whispered. Her stomach tightened. I don't have anything to give you. He crouched closer, his long fingers brushing the straw. It is not always now, but later. Something of great value, something you will hold dear one day. The girl felt a chill run down her spine. She did not know what he meant, but fear and desperation overpowered her worry. Please. I promise I will give you whatever you ask. Just help me now. With a sly, knowing smile, he clapped his hands. The straw in the enormous room began to move as if it were alive. Threads stretched and twisted, gleaming like tiny golden snakes. By morning, the room that had been filled with rough, dull straw now shimmered with gold from floor to ceiling. The girl stood in awe, both amazed and frightened at what had happened. When the king returned, his eyes sparkled with greed. This is more than I imagined, he exclaimed. Tomorrow, I will give you a room twice as big. Make it gold by morning, or, he let the threat linger in the cold morning air. The girl shivered. She now understood the truth, magic always demands a price, and she had made a secret promise she did not fully understand. The little man watched from the shadows, a quiet chuckle escaping his lips. Remember, he whispered to no one but her, every gift comes at a price. And one day, you will pay. The night felt colder than before. The girl lay awake on the hard, cold stone floor, staring at the golden piles around her. She wondered who the little man truly was, why he helped her, and what price he would ask in the future. Her eyes traced the glittering gold, and her mind trembled with fear. Could she keep her promise? Could she survive the king's endless greed? The castle was quiet, but in the corners, shadows twisted, whispering secrets only the night could hold. And far away, the tiny figure vanished into the darkness, leaving the girl alone with her wonder, her fear, and the gold that had come from the hands of magic. The next morning, the girl awoke to a strange mix of fear and awe. The golden piles in the room sparkled in the first light of dawn, reflecting every beam that sneaked through the castle windows. She ran her fingers lightly over the gold, feeling its cold smoothness. It was beautiful, yes, but her heart was heavy. She knew she had made a promise she did not yet understand. The king returned that morning, his eyes wide with greed and excitement. He paced the room, muttering under his breath. This is not enough, he said at last, though the gold around him glimmered like the sun. I want more. Bring her a larger room filled with straw tonight. She must spin it into gold by morning, or, his eyes darkened with a dangerous gleam. The girl's stomach twisted with fear. She could barely speak. I don't know how I can do it, she whispered to herself. The walls of the castle seemed to close in around her. She thought about the tiny man who had appeared from the shadows the night before. Could he help her again? And what would he want in return? That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the castle walls in deep shades of red and purple, the girl sat alone in the massive room filled with straw. The piles seemed taller than towers, and the shadows they cast looked like dark, looming giants. Her hands shook as she ran her fingers through the dry stalks. She felt completely trapped. Suddenly, a tapping sound echoed from the corner of the room, soft at first, then louder. The girl froze, her heart beating rapidly. From the shadows emerged the tiny man once more. His long fingers twitched, and his eyes gleamed mischievously. "You look troubled," he said softly, stepping closer. "The king's greed grows. He will not wait. You need my help again, yes?" The girl nodded, tears running down her cheeks. "Yes, please help me. I can't do this on my own. I don't know how I will survive the night." The tiny man crouched low, studying her with sharp, twinkling eyes. "And what will you give me this time?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. The girl's throat went dry. She had nothing to give now. I will give you anything you ask." "Anything," she said, her voice shaking. The tiny man's lips curled into a sly, almost frightening smile. "Very well. You are clever and desperate. Desperation makes deals easier." He clapped his hands, and the straw began to twist and turn in the dim light. It moved as if alive, spinning itself into threads of gold. The girl watched in awe as the piles disappeared and the room filled with shining treasure. By morning, the king returned and gasped at the sight. "This is incredible," he exclaimed, rubbing his hands together. "But you must do it again tomorrow, in an even larger room. More gold." His voice thundered across the stone walls. The girl sank to the floor, exhausted and frightened. She felt trapped in a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. Every night, the tiny man appeared to help her, and every morning, the king's demands grew. Days turned into nights, and nights into endless spinning. The girl hardly slept, her hands raw from holding the spinning wheel that had become a strange extension of herself. She began to wonder about the tiny man's intentions. Why did he help her? And what would he demand in return one day? One night, as she sat crying in the cold room, the tiny man appeared again. He tilted his head, watching her with a strange, knowing look. "Remember," he whispered, "everything has a price. And one day, your price will be mine." The girl shivered. She did not understand what he meant, but fear tightened around her heart like icy chains. The castle walls seemed darker than ever, and the golden treasure that once filled her with awe now made her feel trapped. The king's greed had turned her life into a prison of gold and shadow. And far away, in the quiet corners of the castle, the tiny man vanished once more into the night, leaving only his whispers behind. The girl lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how she could escape the growing danger, and what terrifying price awaited her in the future. The gold sparkled, but the girl's heart was heavy. She understood now that magic, while beautiful, could also be dangerous. And the tiny man was a mystery she could not yet unravel. The next morning, the king's eyes gleamed with greed brighter than ever. The golden piles in the room were not enough for him. "You have done well, girl," he said, his voice cold and sharp, "but tomorrow I will give you the greatest challenge of all. I will lock you in a room filled with more straw than you have ever seen in your life. By morning, it must all be gold. If it is not, I will not forgive failure." The girl's heart sank. She had no idea how she could possibly do it. The memory of the tiny man's warning echoed in her mind, "Everything has a price. And one day, your price will be mine." That night, she was led to the room, larger and darker than any she had been in before. The straw reached the ceiling, piled in huge mounds, and filled every corner. The smell of dry stalks was sharp in her nose, and the shadows cast by the moonlight made the room feel like a cavern of giants. She sank to the floor, exhausted from the past nights of spinning gold. Her hands ached, her eyes were heavy, and her heart pounded with fear. "I cannot do this, it is impossible," she whispered, her voice trembling. She felt tears streaming down her cheeks. The golden light from yesterday's success felt far away now, replaced by darkness and dread. Suddenly, a small tapping echoed from the shadows. She froze. The tiny man emerged, his eyes sparkling in the dim moonlight. His long fingers curled like twigs, and his voice carried a strange, echoing melody.
Ah.
The girl is in trouble again, he said softly, almost teasingly. The king demands the impossible. He never learns. You need my help, yes? The girl nodded quickly, desperation in every movement. Please. I cannot do it alone. I will give you anything, anything at all. Just help me. The tiny man's eyes glimmered, almost with delight. Anything, he asked, crouching near her. Even what you do not yet own, even what you hold most dear? The girl hesitated. Her mind raced. I promise anything. Just, please, her voice broke. She was tired, afraid, and feeling trapped by the king's endless greed. The tiny man's sly smile grew wider. Very well, he said. I will spin the straw into gold for you, but you must promise me, your firstborn child, one day, when the time comes. The girl gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. What? No. I cannot, that is too much. Desperation makes promises easier, the tiny man whispered. His eyes gleamed in the shadowy room. Do you agree? She looked around, at the mountain of straw surrounding her, the walls so high and dark they seemed to crush her spirit. She thought of the king's anger, of failure, and of what might happen if she did not survive the night. With a trembling voice, she whispered, I promise. Anything, just please, help me. With a clap of his long, slender fingers, the straw began to twist and spin as if alive. Threads of gold danced through the air, wrapping around each other in a dazzling display. The girl watched, wide-eyed and trembling, as the room slowly transformed. By morning, every corner, every pile, every inch of straw had turned into shining gold. The king returned at dawn, his greedy eyes widening at the sight. This is beyond belief, he exclaimed. Bring her more straw tomorrow. She must keep making gold. The world will marvel at my riches. The girl sank to the floor, exhausted and trembling. She had survived again, but at a terrible price. The tiny man watched from the shadows, his eyes twinkling with secrets, and then vanished before she could even speak. For the first time, the girl understood the weight of her promise. She had given away something precious, something she did not even have yet, but that one day would belong to her. The thought of it made her chest tighten and her stomach turn. That night, she lay awake on the cold stone floor, staring at the golden piles around her. She could not sleep. She imagined the tiny man coming to claim his price one day, and fear filled every corner of her heart. The castle walls felt colder than ever, and the golden treasures, once a symbol of wonder, now felt like a cage. The shadows whispered around her, echoing the tiny man's warning, everything comes at a price. One day, you will pay. And far away, in the silent corners of the castle, the tiny man vanished into the night, leaving only a faint trail of magic and mystery behind him. The girl had survived the impossible task, but the story of the gold, and the price she had promised, was only beginning. Years passed, and the poor miller's daughter was no longer poor. She had survived the impossible tasks, spun mountains of straw into gold, and finally won the king's favor. The king, greedy as ever, married her, and she became a queen. The castle, once cold and frightening, now shone with golden treasures and rich tapestries, yet her heart never fully felt at ease. Though the kingdom admired her, and the people celebrated her rise from a simple miller's daughter to a queen, she could not forget the tiny man and the terrible promise she had made. Every night, she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling of her golden chamber, imagining the long fingers and mischievous eyes of Rumpelstiltskin, whispering his warning, everything has a price, one day, you will pay. Time passed, and one bright, joyful morning, the queen gave birth to a child. The king was overjoyed, and the people of the kingdom celebrated. The tiny baby, with rosy cheeks and soft golden hair, was the center of everyone's world. The queen held her child in her arms, her heart filled with love and dread. For the first time in years, the thought of her promise returned like a shadow over her happiness. She had promised her firstborn to the tiny man, and now the day had come when he might return to claim it. Her stomach twisted with fear, and her hands trembled as she gently rocked the baby. She had tried to forget, tried to hope that the strange little man would never appear again, but deep down, she knew it was impossible. One cold, dark night, as the castle slept quietly under the moonlight, a faint tapping echoed through the halls. The queen's heart froze. She recognized the sound instantly, the same sound that had announced the tiny man in the past. From the shadows emerged Rumpelstiltskin, his long fingers curling, his eyes sparkling with mischief and cunning. He was smaller than a man, yet his presence seemed to fill the entire room.
"Ah!"
"The queen, with her golden child," he said, his voice soft but chilling. "Do you remember the promise you made so long ago?" The queen's lips trembled, and her hands clutched the baby tightly. I remember," she whispered. "Please, there must be another way. Take something else, anything else, but not my child." The tiny man's eyes twinkled with dark delight. "No, little queen. I helped once, I helped twice, and now, the price is due. Your firstborn belongs to me." Fear gripped her like ice. Her knees weakened, and she sank to the floor, holding her baby close. "No. There must be some way to save my child. I cannot give him to you," she cried, her voice echoing off the golden walls. Rumpelstiltskin leaned closer, a sly grin spreading across his face. "Perhaps there is one way," he whispered. "You may keep your child, if you can discover my name in 3 days. Fail, and the child is mine." The queen gasped, hope flickering in her heart. 3 days? I will find it. I will find your name." The tiny man laughed, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. "Try, little queen, but names are secrets. Few ever know mine." With that, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving a faint trail of magic and menace behind. The queen was left alone in her chamber, clutching her child. The golden treasures around her suddenly felt heavy, almost like chains. She knew the next 3 days would be filled with terror, worry, and the desperate race to save her child. Every corner of the castle seemed to whisper, every shadow seemed to watch, as if the walls themselves knew the tiny man's secret and were waiting to see if she could unravel it. Her love for her child gave her courage, but the fear of the tiny man, the memory of the price she had promised, and the ticking of 3 short days pressed on her like a storm. She had survived impossible tasks before, spun straw into gold, and faced the king's greed, but this was different. This was her child, the most precious thing in the world, and the tiny man's dark magic seemed unstoppable. And far away, in the forests and shadows, Rumpelstiltskin smiled, knowing the game had only just begun. The queen would have to be clever, brave, and relentless if she wanted to save her baby from the fate she had unknowingly promised years ago. The queen could hardly sleep that night. Her baby, warm and soft in her arms, was her entire world, yet the shadow of the tiny man's return loomed over her like a storm cloud. She remembered every detail, the long fingers, the glittering eyes, the sly smile, and the terrifying promise she had made so many years ago. "Your firstborn belongs to me, unless you guess my name." 3 days. Only 3 days to save her child. The queen's heart pounded as she paced the golden halls of the castle. She whispered the tiny man's warning over and over, "Try, little queen, but names are secrets. Few ever know mine." She clenched her fists. She could not let him take her baby. She would do anything, go anywhere, leave no stone unturned, to save her child. The first day, she began asking the servants in the castle. "Have you ever heard of a strange little man who helps spin straw into gold?" she asked, trying not to reveal the urgency in her voice. But none had seen him except her. The walls of the castle seemed silent, indifferent, as if the gold around her mocked her fear. The second day, she ventured into the village in disguise. She spoke to villagers, travelers, and old storytellers, describing the tiny man who had helped her so long ago. Some shook their heads. Some laughed. One old woman whispered, "People say he lives in the forest, dancing and singing, spinning gold for those desperate enough to make a deal with him." Hope sparked in the queen's heart. She left the village and walked into the dark forest, following the trail the old woman described. Birds rustled nervously in the trees, and the wind whispered strange secrets through the branches. Shadows moved, and every snapping twig made her heart leap. She called out softly, "Rumpelstiltskin. Show yourself. Tell me your name." A rustling sound came from the undergrowth, and she froze. She thought it was him. Her pulse quickened. But it was only a fox, its eyes gleaming in the moonlight. She shivered but pressed on, determined. On the third day, exhausted and nearly despairing, she returned to the castle. She sat by her child, stroking his soft hair, tears falling down her cheeks. "What shall I do?" she whispered. "I cannot lose you. I cannot." That night, as the clock struck the darkest hour, a tapping echoed through the room. Her heart leapt. He had come, the tiny man, smaller than a man but filled with terrifying energy, appeared in the shadows.
"Ah!"
"The queen, desperate and clever," he said, his voice smooth and chilling. "3 days have passed. Do you know my name?" The queen swallowed hard. She shook her head. I do not, but I will find it. I will not let you take my child." The tiny man's eyes glinted. "Then the child is mine," he said, beginning to laugh, a laugh that echoed off the walls, high and eerie, like a song of the forest itself. "No one knows my name. Try as you might, little queen, it is impossible." The queen's heart pounded, but she remembered the words of the villagers. One had said he was in the forest, singing and dancing. Another had mentioned hearing him call himself in the night. She clutched her baby tightly, determination flashing in her eyes. She would find a way. The tiny man's laughter filled the room, and he danced around her, long fingers curling, eyes sparkling with mischief. 3 guesses. Fail, and your child is mine. The queen thought fast. She tried every name she had heard whispered in the village, in the forests, in her dreams. Nothing worked. The tiny man's smile widened. "Wrong, wrong, wrong," he said, his voice like sharp wind. Fear pressed like a heavy stone, but then, she remembered a strange moment from the forest. A villager had mentioned hearing him sing his name as he danced around a fire. She closed her eyes, whispered softly, and with a bold voice, said, "Is your name Rumpelstiltskin?" The tiny man froze. His eyes widened in shock. His jaw dropped. He stomped the floor in fury. "No, no, how did you know my name?" The queen held her breath, clutching her baby close, her heart pounding like a drum. The shadows seemed to lean back, and the golden treasures around her seemed to shimmer with relief. The queen's heart raced as the words left her lips, "Is your name Rumpelstiltskin?" For a moment, the room went completely silent. The tiny man froze, his long fingers stiff, his eyes wide with shock. His small body trembled with rage. "No, no. How did you know my name?" he cried, his voice rising into a high, terrifying shriek that echoed off the golden walls. The queen clutched her baby close, her chest heaving, but she held her ground. She had done it. She had outsmarted the mysterious man who had haunted her life for years. The fear that had pressed upon her like a storm was finally beginning to lift. Rumpelstiltskin's face twisted with fury. He stomped the floor with his tiny feet, but his magic began to falter. His long fingers curled and twisted in frustration, and the sparkle in his eyes turned into a flash of anger. "This cannot be. No one has ever guessed my name. I am Rumpelstiltskin, and you cannot defeat me." The queen's courage grew. "I have defeated your tricks and your spells. You cannot have my child. You cannot harm my family," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the shaking of her hands. Rumpelstiltskin screamed in fury, spinning around the room, a whirlwind of magic and mischief. He stomped, waved his long fingers, and shouted spells, but the queen remained calm. She whispered softly to her baby, stroking his hair, "We are safe now. You are safe." The tiny man's shouts grew louder and more desperate. The golden treasures around the room trembled, as if they too were frightened by his rage. But then, with a loud, echoing cry, Rumpelstiltskin began to shrink. His body twisted and curled, spinning into himself, until with a final scream that echoed through the castle halls, he vanished completely. The queen's knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, tears of relief streaming down her face. She held her child tightly, rocking him gently. "It is over," she whispered. "It is finally over." The golden treasures shimmered softly in the morning light, no longer a cage, but a symbol of triumph. The queen stood slowly, lifting her baby high, feeling the warmth of his tiny hands against her chest. She realized then that courage, cleverness, and love had won over fear and dark magic. Word of the tiny man's defeat spread quickly through the castle and the kingdom. The people celebrated the queen's bravery and cleverness. The queen outsmarted Rumpelstiltskin, they cheered. She saved her child and protected the kingdom. The king, once so greedy and blind to the consequences of his desires, watched in awe as his wife's courage became the story of the realm. He finally understood that wealth and gold were nothing compared to wisdom, cleverness, and love. He held his queen's hand and whispered, "You are wiser than any magic, my love. You have saved us all." The queen smiled, her heart light for the first time in years. She had survived impossible tasks, faced the darkness of greed and fear, and outsmarted the most cunning trickster in the land. Her child was safe, her kingdom was at peace, and the shadows of the past had finally lifted. Even the forest seemed to celebrate her victory. Birds sang in the trees, streams sparkled in the sunlight, and the flowers seemed to bow in the gentle breeze. It was as if nature itself recognized the triumph of cleverness, courage, and love. And though the queen never forgot the lessons of those dark nights, the mountains of straw, the endless spinning, the terrifying promises, she knew one thing for certain: no magic, no matter how powerful, could overpower a brave heart and a clever mind. The queen raised her child high again, smiling at the golden sunlight streaming through the castle windows. She whispered softly, "We will always be safe, together." Rumpelstiltskin was gone, but the story of his tricks and the queen's cleverness would live on forever. And from that day forward, the castle was filled with laughter, warmth, and love, rather than fear, greed, and shadows. The queen had won, and her courage had changed the fate of the kingdom forever. And so, the girl who once trembled before a mountain of straw had become a queen, a mother, and a legend, a reminder to all that cleverness, bravery, and love can overcome even the darkest magic.